Good morning. I am Varun Hans, advocate, practicing in litigation since 2005, and I've had an experience of more than 5,200 matrimonial matters, which includes divorces, which includes court marriages, which includes marriage registrations, counselings, and a lot of conferences between the spouses. So today my topic of discussion is Hindu Marriage Act, which was enacted on 18th May 1955. So it's called Hindu Marriage Act 1955. So I'm going to start here. Basically, the object of the legislation in the Hindu Marriage Act are mainly first to liberalize the provisions relating to divorce, secondly, to enable expeditious disposal of proceedings under the Act, and thirdly, to remove certain anomalies and handicaps that have come to the light after passing of the Act. Now, in 1978, also there was an amendment which said it is also being provided the offences under Child Marriage Restraint Act may be investigated upon by a police officer under the Code of Criminal Procedure as if it were a cognizable offence. And then as to amend section 39 of the Special Marriage Act also 1954 and section 28 of the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 to provide respectively that the parties to a matrimonial suit could prefer appeal within a period of 90 days instead of 30 days. So these are the object and amendments. Now coming back to the main law enshrined in Hindu Marriage Act 1955. First, Section 1 says short title and extent. This act may be called the Hindu Marriage Act 1955. It extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir and applies also to Hindus domiciled in territories to which this act extends who are outside the said territories. Section 2 Application of Act. This act applies A. to any person who is a Hindu by religion in and any of its forms or developments, including a Virashaiv, a Lingayat, or a follower of Brahmo, Prarthana, or Arya Samaj. B. To any person who is a Buddhist, Jain, or Sikh by religion. And C. To any person domiciled in the territories to which this act extends who is not a Muslim, Christian, Parsi, or Jew by religion. He is not a Christian, Muslim, Parsi, or Jew by religion unless it is provided that any such person would not have been governed by the Hindu law or by any custom or usage as part of that law in respect of any of the matters dealt with herein if this act had not been passed. Now there is an explanation to this section. The following persons are Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, or Sikhs by religion, as the case may be. A. Any child, legitimate or illegitimate, both of whose parents are Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, or Sikhs by religion. B. Any child, legitimate or illegitimate, one of whose parents is a Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, or Sikh by religion, and who is brought up as a member of the tribe, community, group, or family to which such parent belongs or belonged. C. Any person who is a convert or reconvert to Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, or Sikh religion. Now the second says, number 2 says, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, nothing contained in this act shall apply to the members of any shall apply nothing contained in this act shall apply to the members of any scheduled tribe within the meaning of section 20 clause 25 of article 366 of constitution unless the central government the notification in the official gazette otherwise directs. The expression Hindu in any portion of this act shall be construed as if it included a person who, though not a Hindu by religion, is nevertheless a person to whom this act applies by virtue of provisions contained in this section. Now coming to section 3, it is for definitions. A defines custom and usage. B defines district court. C defines full blood and half blooded. D defines uterine blood. E defines prescribed. F subclause I defines sapenda relationship. Subclause 2 defines two persons are said to be sapendas. G defines degrees of prohibited relationship. I is if one is of linear ascendant of the other. Number two, if one was the wife or husband of a linear descendant of the other, and so these are the degree of prohibited relationships. Now, section 4 is overriding effect of act. Save as otherwise expressly provided in this act, any text, rule, or interpretation of Hindu law, or any custom or usage as part of that law in force immediately before the commencement of this act shall cease to have effect with respect to any matter for which provision is made in this act. B. Any other law in force immediately before the commencement of this act shall cease to have effect in so far as it is inconsistent with any of the provisions contained in this act. Now coming is incapable of giving a valid consent to it in consequence of unsoundness of mind. B. Though capable of giving a valid consent, has been suffering from mental disorder of such a kind or to such an extent as to unfit for marriage and procreation of children. C. Has been subject to recurrent attacks of insanity. Now Roman 3. The bridegroom has completed the age of 21 years and the bride the age of 18 years at the time of marriage. Number 4. The parties are not within the degrees of prohibited relationship unless the custom or usage governing each of them permits of a marriage between the two. Now prohibited relationships we have already discussed in section 3 subclause D. Alright. So now number 5, the parties are not sapendas, of it that is also defined, unless the custom or usage governing each of them permits of a marriage between the two. Now coming to section 6, guardianship in marriage, that has been omitted in 1978. Now section 7, ceremonies for a Hindu marriage. A Hindu marriage may be solemnized in accordance with the customary rites and ceremonies of party thereto. Second, where such rites and ceremonies include the Satpadi, that is Sat Fere, that is the taking of 7 steps by bridegroom and the bride jointly before the sacred fire, the marriage becomes complete and binding when the 7th step is taken. Now, there is a section 7a, special provisions regarding to Suya Marthai and Sir Thiru marriages, which is not very important here. These are state amendments. Now coming to section 8, registration of Hindu marriages. This is a very important section because these days you have to open your bank account. I mean, I'll come to the explanations and landmark judgments in my next video. Section 8 says registration of Hindu marriages. For the purpose of facilitating the proof of Hindu marriages, the state government may make rules providing that the parties to any such marriage may have the particulars related to their marriage entered in such manner and subject to such conditions as may be prescribed in the Hindu marriage register kept for that purpose. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, the state government may, if it is of opinion that it is necessary or expedient so to do, provided that the entering of the particulars referred to subsection 1 shall be compulsory in the state or any part thereof, whether in all cases or in such cases as may be specified, and where any such direction has been issued, any person contravening any rule made in this behalf shall be punishable with fine which may extend to 25 rupees. All rules made under this section shall be laid before the state legislature as soon as may be after they met. So it's a state subject. The Hindu marriage register shall at all reasonable times be open for inspection and shall be admissible as evidence of the statements therein contained, and certified extracts therefrom shall on application be given by the registrar on payment to him of the prescribed fee. Notwithstanding anything contained in this section, the validity of any Hindu marriage shall in no way be affected by omission to make the entry. So the court doesn't say that the marriage will become illegal if you don't register your marriage, but then that's the law. You have to register your marriage. Now coming to section 9, this starts once you are married. After section 8, this process starts. So now section 9 says, when either of the husband or the wife has, without reasonable excuse, withdrawn from the society of the other, the aggrieved may apply by petition to district court for restitution of conjugal rights, and the court, on being satisfied of the truth of the statements made in such petition and that there is no legal ground why the application should not be granted, may decree restitution of conjugal rights accordingly. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, no petition for annulling the marriage A on the grounds specified in clause A of subsection 1 shall be entertained if, first, the petition is presented more than 1 year after the force had ceased to operate, as the case may be the fraud had been discovered, or 2, the petitioner has with his or her full consent lived with the other party or to the marriage as husband or wife after the force had ceased to operate, as the case may be the fraud had been discovered. B. On the grounds specified in clause D of subsection 1 shall be entertained unless the court is satisfied that the petitioner was at the time of marriage ignorant of the facts alleged, that proceedings have been instituted in the case of a marriage solemnized before the commencement of this act within 1 year of such commencement, and in the case of marriages solemnized after such commencement within 1 year from the date of marriage, and that marital intercourse with the consent of the petitioner has not taken place since the discovery by the petitioner of the existence of such ground. Now after section things I've jumped the gun. After section 9, section 9 was restitution of conjugal rights. So now coming to section 10, I think I jumped the page. Judicial separation. Either party to a marriage, whether solemnized before or after the commencement of this act, may present a petition praying for a decree of judicial separation on any of the grounds specified in subsection 1 of section 13, and in the case of a wife, also on any of the grounds specified in subsection 2 thereof, as grounds on which a petition for divorce might have been presented. Where a decree for judicial separation has been passed, it shall no longer be obligatory for the petitioner to cohabit with the respondent, but the court may, on the application by the petition of either party, and on being satisfied of the truth of the statements made in such petition, resign the decree if it considers it just and reasonable to do so. This is judicial separation. Now coming to section 11, it talks about void marriages. Any marriages solemnized after the commencement of this act shall be null and void, and may, on a petition presented by either party thereto, be so declared by a decree of nullity if it contravenes any of the conditions specified in subclause 1, 4 and 5 of section 5. Remember section 5? Okay. Now section 12, voidable marriages. Any marriage solemnized whether before or after the commencement of this act shall be voidable and may be annulled by a decree of nullity on any of the following grounds, namely. So this is, I was reading section 12 earlier, now this is the section 12. So the grounds of voidable marriages are that the marriage has been consummated owing to impotence of the respondent, that the marriage is in contravention of the conditions specified in clause 2 of section 5. Now section 5 has come twice, so I'm going to repeat section 5 here, which says conditions of a Hindu marriage, and you had all grounds of insanity, unsoundness of mind, age and everything, right? So now coming to the C point, that the consent of the petitioner, or where the consent of the guardian in marriage of the petitioner was required under section 5 as it stood immediately before the commencement of the Child Marriage Restraint Act 1978, the consent of such guardian was obtained by force or by fraud as to the nature of the ceremony or as to any material fact or circumstances concerning the respondent. D. That the respondent was at the time of the marriage pregnant by some other person than the petitioner. Second, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, no petition for annulling a marriage A on the grounds specified in clause A of subsection 1 shall be entertained if, first, the petition is presented more than 1 year after the force had been ceased to operate, that's a limitation, as the case may be the fraud had been discovered. Second, the petitioner has with his or her full consent lived with the other party to the marriage as husband or wife after the force had ceased to operate, as the case may be, the fraud had been discovered. B. On the ground specified in clause D of subsection 1 shall be entertained unless the court is satisfied 1. That the petitioner was at the time of marriage ignorant of the facts alleged, that proceedings have been instituted in the case of a marriage solemnized before the commencement of this act within 1 year of such commencement, and in the case of marriage solemnized after such commencement within 1 year from the date of marriage, that marital intercourse with the consent of the petitioner has not taken place since the discovery by the petitioner of the existence of the said ground. So what we will be discussing here is voidable marriages. Now coming to the most important section of this bare act, that is section 13, divorce. 1. Any marriage solemnized before or after the commencement of this act may, on a petition presented by either the husband or the wife, be dissolved by a decree of divorce on the ground that the other party, 1, has after the solemnization of marriage had voluntary sexual intercourse with any person other than his or her spouse. 1A has after the solemnization of marriage treated the petitioner with cruelty. 1B has deserted the petitioner for a continuous period of not less than 2 years immediately preceding the presentation of this petition. Second, has ceased to be a Hindu by conversion to another religion. 3. Has been incurably of sound mind or has been suffering continuously or intermittently from mental disorder of such a kind and to such an extent that the petitioner cannot reasonably be expected to live with the respondent. And now there is an explanation to this clause. A. The expression mental disorder means mental illness, arrested or incomplete development of mind, psychopathic disorder, or any other disorder or disability of mind and includes schizophrenia. B. The expression psychopathic disorder means a persistent disorder or disability of mind which results in abnormally aggressive or seriously irresponsible conduct on the part of the other party, and whether or not it requires or is susceptible to medical treatment. 4. Been suffering from a virulent and incurable form of leprosy. 5. Has been suffering from venereal disease in a communicable form. 6. Has renounced the world by entering any religious order. 7. Has not been heard of being alive for a period of 7 years or more by those persons who would naturally have heard of it, had that party been alive. Now there is an explanation. In this subsection, the expression desertion means the desertion of the petitioner by the other party to the marriage without reasonable cause and without the consent or against the wish of such party, and includes the willful neglect of the petitioner by the other party to the marriage, and its grammatical variations and cognate expressions shall be construed accordingly. Now 1A, either party to a marriage whether solemnized before or after the commencement of this act may also present the petition for dissolution of marriage by a decree of divorce on the ground 1. That there has been no resumption of cohabitation as between the parties to the marriage for a period of 1 year or upwards after the passing of a decree of judicial separation in a proceedings to which they were parties, or number 2, that there has been no restitution of conjugal rights as between the parties to the marriage, which we spoke in section 9, to the marriage as for a period of 1 year or upwards after the passing of a decree of restitution of conjugal rights in a proceedings to which they were parties. Second, a wife may also present for the dissolution of a marriage by a decree of divorce on the ground, number 1, in the case of any marriage solemnized before the commencement of this act, that the husband had married again before such commencement, or that any other wife of the husband married before such commencement was alive at the time of solemnization of the marriage of the petitioner, provided that in either case the other wife alive at the time of the presentation of the petition, or that the husband has since the solemnization of the marriage been guilty of rape, sodomy, that's another ground, that in a suit under section 18 of Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, or in a proceedings under section 125 of CRPC 1973, a decree or order as the case may be has been passed against the husband awarding maintenance to the wife, notwithstanding that she was living apart and that since the passing of such decree or order, cohabitation between the parties has not been resumed for 1 year or upwards. Number 4, that her marriage was solemnized before she attained the age of 15 years and she has repudiated the marriage after attaining that age but before attaining the age of 18 years. Now, uh, coming to there are some state amendments and comments. Now, coming to section 13A, alternate relief in divorce proceedings. In any proceedings under this act on a petition for dissolution of marriage by a decree of divorce, except insofar as the petition is founded on the ground of mentioned in clause 2, 6 and 7 of subsection 1 of section 13 of court may, if it considered just so, to do having regard to the circumstances of the case, pass instead a decree of judicial separation. Now coming to section 13B, divorce by mutual consent. Subject to the provisions of this act, a petition for dissolution of marriage by a decree of divorce may be presented to the district court by both the parties to a marriage together, whether such marriage was solemnized before or after the commencement of the marriage laws 1976, on the ground that they have been living separately for a period of 1 year or more, that they have not been able to live together, and that they have mutually agreed that the marriage should be dissolved. 13b2, on the motion of both the parties made not earlier than 6 months after the date of presentation of the petition referred to in subsection 1 and not later than 18 months after the said date, if the petition is not withdrawn in the meantime, the court shall, on being satisfied after hearing the parties and after making such inquiry as it thinks fit, that a marriage has been solemnized and that the avertments in the petition are true, pass a decree of divorce declaring the marriage to be dissolved with effect from the date of decree. Now section 14. No petition for divorce to be presented within 1 year of marriage. Notwithstanding anything contained in this act, it shall not be competent for any court to entertain any petition for dissolution of marriage by a decree of divorce unless at the date of presentation of the petition 1 year has elapsed since the date of marriage, provided that the court may, upon application made to it in accordance with such rules as may be by the High Court in that behalf, allow a petition to be presented since the date of the marriage on the ground that the case is one of exceptional hardship to the petitioner or of exceptional depravity on the part of the respondent. But if it appears to the court that at the hearing of the petition that the petitioner has obtained leave to present the petition by any misrepresentation or concealment of the nature of the case, the court may, if it pronounces a decree, do so subject to condition that the decree shall not have effect until after the expiry of 1 year from the date of the marriage, or may dismiss the petition without prejudice to any petition which may be brought after the expiration of said 1 year upon the same or substantially the same facts as those alleged in the support of the petition so dismissed. Number 2. In disposing of any application under this section for leave to present a petition for divorce before expiration of 1 year from the date of the marriage, the court shall have regard to the interests of any children of the marriage and to the question whether there is reasonable probability of a reconciliation between the parties before the expiration of the said 1 year. Now section 15, divorced persons when may marry again. When a marriage has been dissolved by a decree of divorce and either party there is no right of appeal against the decree, or if there is such a right or time, or if there is such a right of appeal against the decree, or if there is such a right of appeal, the time of appealing has expired without an appeal being presented, or an appeal has been presented but has been dismissed, it shall be lawful for either party to the marriage to marry again. Now section 16, legitimacy of children of void and voidable marriages. Notwithstanding that a marriage is null and void under section 11, any child of such marriage who would have been legitimate if the marriage had been void shall be legitimate whether such a child is born before or after of the commencement of Hindu marriage, the marriage laws 1976, and whether or not a decree of nullity is granted in respect of that marriage under this act, and whether or not the marriage is held to be void otherwise than on a petition under this act. 2. Where a decree of nullity is granted in respect of a voidable marriage under section 12, any child begotten or conceived before the decree is made who would have been legitimate child of the parties to the marriage is, if at the date of decree it had been dissolved instead of being annulled, shall be deemed to be the legitimate child for notwithstanding to the decree of nullity. 3. Nothing contained in subsection 1 or subsection 2 shall be construed as conferring upon any child of a marriage which is null and void or which is annulled by a decree of nullity under section 12 any rights in or to the property of any person other than the parents in any case where but for the passing of this act such child would have been incapable of possessing or acquiring any such rights, reason of his not being legitimate child of his parents. Section 17 is punishment of bigamy. Any marriage between two Hindus solemnized after commencement of this act is void if at the date of such marriage either party had a husband or wife living, and the provision of section 494 and 495 of Indian Penal Code shall apply accordingly. Section 18 is punishment for contravention of certain order conditions for a Hindu marriage. Every person who procures a marriage of himself or herself to be solemnized under this act in contravention of the conditions specified in clause 3, 4 of section 5, remember section 5, shall be punishable. In the case of contravention of conditions specified in clause 3 and of section 5, with rigorous imprisonment which may extend to 2 years, or with fine which may extend to 1 lakh rupees, or with both. B. In the case of contravention of conditions specified in clause 4 or clause 5 of the section 5, with simple imprisonment which may extend to 1 month, or with fine which may extend to 1000 rupees, or with both. Now coming to jurisdiction and procedure, that's chapter 5, section 19. Section 19 is about courts to which the petition shall be presented. Every petition under this act shall be presented to the district court within the local limits of whose original civil jurisdiction the marriage was solemnized. The respondent at the time of presentation of the petition resides. The parties to the marriage last resided together. 3A, this is an amendment, in case the wife is the petitioner where she is residing on the date of presentation of the petition. 4. The petitioner is residing at the time of presentation of the petition in a case where the respondent is at that time residing outside the territories to which this act extends, or has not been heard of as being alive for a period of 7 years or more by those persons who would naturally have been heard of him if he were alive. Now coming to section 20, it's the contents and verification of petitions. Every petition presented under this act shall state as distinctly as the nature of case permits the facts on which the claim to relief is founded, that there is no collusion between the petitioner and the other party to the marriage. Second, the statements contained in every petition under this act shall be verified by the petitioner or some other competent person in the manner required by law for the verification of claims, and may at the hearing be referred to as evidence. Now coming to section 21, application of section 5 of 1908, subject to the other provisions contained in this act and to such rules as the High Court may make in this behalf, all proceedings under this act shall be regulated as may be by the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. Section 21A, power to transfer petitions in certain cases, where a petition under this act has been presented to a district court having jurisdiction by a party to a marriage praying for a decree of judicial separation under section 10 or for a decree of divorce under section 13, and B, Another petition under this act has been presented thereby by the other party to the marriage, praying for a decree of judicial separation under section 10 or for a decree of divorce under section 13 or any ground, whether in the same district court or in different district court in the same state or in different state, the petition shall be dealt with as specified in subsection 2. In a case where subsection 1 applies, if the petitions are presented to the same district court, both the petitions shall be tried and heard together by that district court. B. If the petitions are presented to different district courts, the petition presented later shall be transferred to the district court in which the earlier petition was presented, and both the petitions shall be heard and disposed of together by the district court in which the earlier petition was presented. 3. In a case where clause B of subsection 2 applies, the court or the government, as the case may be, competent under the Code of Civil Procedure Code to transfer any suit or proceedings from the district court in which the later petition has been presented to the district court in which the earlier petition is pending, shall exercise its powers to transfer such later petitions as if it had been empowered to do so under the said code. Now, section 21B is about special provisions relating to the trial and disposal of petitions under the Act. The trial of a petition under this Act shall, so far as is practicable, consistently with the interests of justice in respect of the trial, be continued from day to day until its conclusion, unless the court finds the adjournment of a trial beyond the following day to be necessary for the reasons to be recorded. Every petition under this Act shall be tried as expeditiously as possible, and endeavour shall be made to conclude the trial within 6 months from the date of service of notice of the petition of the respondent. Every appeal under this Act shall be heard as expeditiously as possible, and endeavour shall be made to conclude the hearing within 3 months from the date of service of notice of appeal on the respondent. Now, section 21C, documentary evidence. Notwithstanding anything in any enactment to the contrary, no document shall be inadmissible in evidence in any proceeding at the trial of a petition under this Act on the ground that it is not duly stamped or registered. Now, section 22, proceedings to be in camera and may not be printed or published. Every proceeding under this Act shall be conducted in camera, and it shall not be lawful for any person to print or publish any matter in relation to any such proceeding except in a judgment of the High Court or the Supreme Court, printed or published with the previous permission of the court. 2. If any person prints or publishes any matter in contravention of the provisions contained in subsection 1, he shall be punishable with fine which may extend to 1,000 rupees. Now, section 23 talks about decree in proceedings. In any proceedings under this Act, whether defended or not, the court is satisfied that A. Any of the grounds for granting relief exists, and the petitioner, except in cases where the relief is sought by him on the grounds specified in subclause A, subclause B, or subclause C of clause 2 of section 5, is not in any way taking advantage of his or her own wrong or disability for the purpose of such relief. B. Whether the ground of the petition is alleged, whether the ground of the petition is the ground specified of section 13, the petitioner has not in any manner been accessory or connived or at or condoned the act or acts complained of, or where the ground of the petition is cruelty and the petitioner has not in any manner condoned the cruelty. Now, subclause B, when a divorce is sought on the ground of mutual consent, such consent has not been obtained by force, fraud, or undue influence. C, the petition is not presented or prosecuted in collusion with the respondent. D, there has not been any unnecessary or improper delay in institution of the proceeding. E, there is no other legal ground why relief should not be granted. Then, in such case, but not otherwise, the court shall decree such relief accordingly. Section 23, subclause 2. Before proceedings to grant any relief under this Act, it shall be the duty of the court in the first instance, in every case where it is possible to do so, consistently with the nature and circumstances of the case, to make every endeavor to bring about a reconciliation between the parties, provided that nothing in this subsection shall apply to any proceedings wherein relief is sought on any of the grounds specified in clause 2, clause 3, clause 4, clause 5, clause 6, clause 7 of subsection 1 of section 13. Now, subclause 3, for the purpose of aiding the court in bringing about such reconciliation, the court may, if the parties so desire or the court thinks it just and proper so to do, adjourn the proceedings for a reasonable period not exceeding 15 days and refer the matter to any person named by the parties in this behalf, or to any person nominated by the court if the parties fail to name any person, with directions to report to the court as to whether reconciliation can be and has been effected, and the court shall, in disposing of the proceedings, have due regard to the report. Now, section 23A, relief for respondent in divorce and other proceedings. In any proceedings for divorce or judicial separation or restitution of conjugal rights, the respondent may not only oppose the relief sought on the ground of petitioner's adultery, cruelty, or desertion, but also make a counterclaim for any relief under this act on that ground. And if the petitioner's adultery, cruelty, or desertion is proved, the court may give to the respondent any relief under this act to which he or she would have been entitled if he or she had presented a petition seeking such relief on that ground. Now, section 24 talks about maintenance pendentility and expenses of proceedings, wherein any proceedings under this act, if it appears to the court that either the wife or the husband, as the case may be, has no independent income sufficient for her or his support and the necessary expenses of the proceedings, it may, on the application of the wife or the husband, and order the respondent to pay to the petitioner the expenses of the proceedings and monthly during the proceeding such sum as, having regard to the petitioner's own income and the income of the respondent, it may seem to the court to be reasonable, provided that such application for the payment of the expenses of the proceedings and such monthly sum during the proceedings shall, as far as possible, be disposed of within 60 days from the date of service of notice on the wife or the husband, as the case may be. Now, section 25 talks about permanent alimony and maintenance. Any court exercising jurisdiction under this act may, at the time of passing any decree or at any time subsequently thereto, on application made to it for the purpose by either the wife or the husband, as the case may be, order that the respondent shall, to the applicant for her or his maintenance and support, such gross sum or such monthly or periodical sum for a term not exceeding the life of the applicant, as having regard to the respondent's own income and other property, if any, the income of and other property of the applicant, it may seem to the court to be just, and any such payment as may be secured, if necessary, by a charge on the immovable property of the respondent. If the court is satisfied that there is a change in the circumstances of either party at any time after it has made an order under subsection 1, it may, for the instance of either party, vary, modify, or assign any such order in such manner as the court may deem just. 3. If the court is satisfied that the party in whose favor has been made under this act, under this section, has remarried, or if such party is the wife that she has not remained chaste, or if such party is the husband that he has had sexual intercourse with any woman outside the wedlock, it may, at the instance of the other party, vary, modify, or assign any such order in such manner as the court may deem fit. Now, section 26 talks about custody of children. In any proceedings under this act, the court may from time to time pass such interim orders and make such provisions in the decree as it may deem just and proper with respondent to the custody, maintenance, and education of minor children consistently with their wishes wherever possible, and may alter the decree upon application by the petitioner for the purpose, make from time to time all such orders and provisions with respect to the custody, maintenance, and education of such children as might have been made by such decree or interim orders, in case the proceedings for obtaining such decree were still pending, and the court may also from time to time revoke, suspend, or vary any such orders and provisions made. Now, Section 27, disposal of property. In any proceedings under this Act, the court may make such provisions in the decree as it deems just and proper with respect to any property presented or about the time of marriage, which may belong jointly or to both the husband and the wife. Now, Section 28 talks about appeals from decrees and orders. All decrees made by the court in any proceedings under this Act, subject to the provisions of subsection 3, be appealable as decrees of the court made in exercise of its civil jurisdiction, and every such appeal shall lie to the court to which appeals ordinarily lie from the decisions of the court given in the exercise of its original civil jurisdiction. Orders made by the court in any proceedings under this Act, under Section 25 or Section 26, shall, subject to the provisions of subsection 3, be appealable if they are not interim orders, and every such appeal shall lie to the court to which appeals ordinarily lie from the decision of the court given in the exercise of original civil jurisdiction. There shall be no appeal under this section on the subject of costs only. Every appeal under this section shall be preferred within a period of 90 days from the date of decree or order. Now, Section 28A talks about enforcement of decrees and orders. All decrees and orders made by the court in any proceedings under this Act shall be enforced in the like manner as the decrees and orders of the court made in the exercise of its original civil jurisdiction for the time being are enforced. Savings. There are some savings, like a marriage solemnized between Hindus before the commencement of the Act, which it otherwise valid, shall not be deemed to be invalid or even to have been invalid by reason only of the fact the parties thereto belong to the same gotra. Number 2 talks about nothing contained in this Act shall be deemed to affect any right recognized by custom or conferred by any special enactment to obtain the dissolution of Hindu marriage, whether solemnized before or after the commencement of this Act. Number 3, nothing contained in this Act shall affect any proceedings under any law for the time being in force for declaring any marriage to be null and void, or for annulling or dissolving any marriage, or for judicial separation pending at the commencement of this Act, and any such proceedings may be continued and determined as if this Act had not been passed. Number 4, notwithstanding anything in this Act shall be deemed to affect the provisions contained in the Special Marriage Act, which with respect to marriages between Hindus solemnized under this Act, whether before or after the commencement of this Act. And Section 30 repeals, it was repealed by the amending out of Section 1960. So this is the Hindu Marriage Act, which I have done a basic reading for you guys, and I hope that you do well in life. It's a good informative video for you guys to revise the Hindu Marriage Act and fight for the right. Thank you.